That's like half the job. I think.
No.
not half the job, but it's like a third of the job. Same job.
We were talking. Never mind. No, we were talking to someone at some point, this year, and we were explaining who we are and who we're interviewing with. Like, oh, you guys got those guys? Okay, yeah, I'm excited to be on this podcast then.
Yeah, social proof is everything.
Everything.
Sorry. Yesterday, we had in LA yesterday, dude. What was it yesterday?
Yesterday we had
Augustus Dorico and Greg Bernstein, so defense tech, and in the morning. So
and then we just got on a flight. But that was actually a really great interview. Like Augustus, I don't know if you guys are familiar with
Rainmaker.
He's
Like a cloud seeding,
but kind of for the modern day, I guess. And
the United States.
Really cool. I don't know. He's like 24. He's so passionate about cloud seeding and like changing the world he's like a strong Christian and just talks about his faith a lot in our interview.
Yeah.
And like, we're both Christians. And so it's just really cool to like hear this guy so passionate about something bigger than just making money or leaving his mark on the world. Like is much more about stewarding the earth well and, helping people get water.
Whenever you hear a pitch, Andy, is passion like one of the things you look for in a founder that you're going to invest in?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be. Like, if there's no passion, like people will just give up too easily. We always say we're looking for missionaries and not mercenaries. We're looking for people who, they're going to run through walls to make things happen. Because startups are hard, right? There's no straight line. It's up and down and back and forth. And if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you'll probably just give up and do something else. There are so many entrepreneurs I see who great people. But, they're just flitting from one thing to the next because they haven't got the commitment to the one idea. Now, saying that, the counter is that, like, if something's not working, you've got to kind of be able to step back and say, actually, how do we fix this and what do we need to change? And so it's always striking a balance. But I would always take kind of passionate over kind of procrastination every time. But
you all invest at the early stage. So in those first meeting or that second meeting, how can you tell if a founder really has that passion or that grit to invest, pretty quickly?
It's a great question. I kind of feel it's a bit like falling in love. It's kind of hard to describe what how it feels, but when you see it, it's like product market fit. You can't explain what product market fit is, but when you feel it, you have it.
Yeah.
A lot of the show we're going to talk about the relationship between Uncork and Fountain, how that started. Before you joined as CEO, Sean, Uncork already invested in Fountain. And I kind of want to talk through, how did that relationship start? How did you meet Keith? How did you meet Fountain? Did they meet y'all? Can you kind of walk us through that story?
So the beginning of the story actually predates my joining Uncork. And
this
really? Is back when Uncork was called Softtech VC. So you've got to wind the clock all the way back to, I started with the team in April 2015. And I think I'd gotten to know the team over the year prior. Jeff was like, hey, we need you on board as soon as you possibly can because we've got deals for you to do. My board at my startup were like, hey, we've got these 10 things we need you to do before you can go. So it's kind of like managing all of those. I actually had this idea originally that I was going to take 6 months off and kind of do all the things I'd never had time to do. I was going to learn to scuba dive. I was going to walk Machu Picchu. I was going to go to New Zealand. And ultimately, with my team's request to keep me on longer and Jeff's need to get me in earlier, this kind of 6 months got compressed to 2 days. So I had a weekend off. I finished at Huddle on the Friday.
Scuba diving in one weekend.
What'd you do that weekend?
And I had the flu at the time. So I think I spent it in bed sweating. But I remember coming in on the Monday morning for my first partner meeting and just like, we've met this really interesting team building this really interesting product in a category that no one's really owning right now. And it was called an Onboard IQ at the time. An Onboard IQ was an ATS, an applicant tracking system for blue collar workers or frontline workers, as we call them now. And you could look at the ecosystem and see that nobody was kind of doing this at scale, like none of the big players. It just wasn't a focus for them. Anyone who was providing software, the software was like 25 years old and kind of looked like crap. And so, these two young guys, and we've always loved this idea of kind of investing in people that maybe don't fall off Silicon Valley central casting couch. These two young guys, they'd worked in startups, but they'd also been frontline workers. And I think they saw firsthand just how bad the process to get hired and then the process and how bad the process for the companies of hiring was. And like, we think we can fix this. And I just remember being very impressed by the quality of the product they'd built so quickly with really kind of no capital. So we ultimately ended up leading that. It was actually the first deal that I did from beginning to end. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to believe that's like almost 9.5 years ago.
Did you get to hear that pitch, or was it already the deal basically finished?
No, I got to hear the pitch, and Jeff and our former partner Stephanie basically said, "Look, we like this team, but you're our SaaS guy, Andy. If you think there's something here, then we can run with it. We like it, but this is your wheelhouse, so take a look."
Sean, though, I want to jump to you. You were the first angel investor, first customer as well into, what was the name at the time?
Onboard
Onboard IQ.
IQ.
Yeah,
what
Onboard
made
IQ.
you want to invest and
Yeah,
become a
I actually was a
customer?
customer before investor.
Okay.
So I think I saw the same sort of grit and passion with the founding team. They were in my office selling me their software. I was hiring drivers, and I loved it. And I casually said to them, "Look, I think these are a few ways the product could be better." They were like, "Could we borrow your conference room?" 3 hours later, they were still in our conference room. I didn't realize I was running a WeWork at that time. But they made a bunch of changes to the product in the conference room. And so then I said, "Okay, we'll be a customer." And there is somewhere in our data room is a contract with my name as a customer of Onboard IQ and Fountain. They made the changes. We signed the contract. And I said to them casually, like, "Look, whenever you're thinking about raising money, I would love to help out however I can." And then wound up becoming an investor and then helping them out a lot and then joined the board. But I think I saw that same passion with the team. I'd echo what Andy talked about earlier. Like, there are so many difficult days as an entrepreneur that if you're strictly mercenary, you will give up too easy.
There's always an easier path.
Always an easier
It's
path.
not the better path, but it might be easier.
Always easier. And it usually is not the better path. Usually not the better path. But if you don't have like that drive behind like the why for what you're doing, it won't matter. At Fountain, our mission is to open opportunities for the global workforce, for this frontline workforce. We think that most of these workers have been underserved by tech. And, when it gets really hard, that's a mission that I can fall back on and say, that's still worth doing. That worker who's delivering packages or working in the restaurant or working in a warehouse, they need a better way to work. And so even when we lose a contract or a customer is really unhappy with us, I can fall back and say, yeah, this is still worth doing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard.
What was it about the team and the product of Onboard IQ when you first met them that you said, like, "Hey, if you guys ever need money, I'm your guy"?
I think Andy mentioned the applicant tracking system. The reality with most of these systems is, up and through 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, no one ever thought I need to go hire 100,000 people with a tiny team. That was never done by anyone. No one ever thought that. And then all of a sudden, Uber led this wave of companies who said, we need to hire 50,000 package delivery people in the next 6 months, which it had taken UPS and FedEx and DHL years and years and years and years to get to 50,000. You had companies trying to hire 50,000 people in a year with almost no infrastructure and no technology. And none of the existing tool sets worked for that use case. Like, there wasn't a tool that was like, oh yeah, let me hire 50,000 drivers. That didn't exist until Onboard IQ came along. And I felt the pain acutely and said, okay, if I feel the pain of hiring and retaining these drivers, there's something real here in terms of its ability to make a difference in this workforce.
Yeah.
Andy, prior to joining Uncork, you were an angel investor into some great startups like Postmates, Calm, et cetera. What's the difference between angel investing versus joining a firm like Uncork? What was your experience like at both of those?
Yeah, I mean, I think angel investing is is in many ways a lot easier because you don't have to answer to anybody other than yourself and maybe your spouse, right? If you lose a bunch of money, you've got to tell your husband or wife kind of what on earth happened. I think when you're venture investing, though, it's different. You're investing on behalf of other people. And it's often, people like to think that venture, you're basically just making rich people richer, and that's not the case. The vast majority of the money that we invest comes from hospitals and charities and endowments, colleges. What we're trying to do is make them the money that allows them to kind of further their causes. And so, like, every time you've got to think, well, look, how risky is this? Early stage investing is, by definition, extremely risky. You can kind of de-risk it through, we look at the people risk, we look at product risk, we look at market risk and technology risk, and you can underwrite 2 or 3 of those. You certainly can't underwrite all of them. And so, what you've got to do is basically say, look, do I think there is a real chance that this one investment could return the entire fund? When you invest as early as we do, we'll have 30-something companies in the fund. You've got to be okay with the fact that most of them, unfortunately, are not going to work. Some of them won't work immediately. Some could, get all the way to Series D pre-IPO and then not work. We saw recently the news about the security company that had been valued at billions and billions of dollars and was ultimately sold for pocket change. Nobody would have seen that coming. But that's how venture works. And I think good VCs are the ones who are good at picking, and they can find the best companies, but then also they know when to keep putting money in and when to back away. I think, as Brad Feld would say, the difference between a good fund and a great fund is not the investments that you make, but what you choose to do with those investments after the first time you put money in.
Hey, y'all. Do you enjoy listening to podcasts? Since you're listening to one right now, I'm going to assume you do. And if you enjoy podcasts, you need to download the Overlap app. We all love long-form podcast conversations, but who has the time to always stay up to date with 3-hour-long interviews? Overlap solves that problem for you by providing only the best podcast moments. The app's AI assistant curates playlists of personalized podcast clips that are tailored to your interests and favorite creators, like us. Just prompt it with any topic and instantly get a playlist of the best short-form moments. So jump over to the App Store now, like right now, and download Overlap. You can also find a link to download below in our description. It's free and we highly recommend it. The app actually does recommend great content, and I learn something new every day from my playlists. Thanks so much to Overlap for sponsoring this episode.
I've always been so curious take for example, the 30 companies that you invest in, knowing that most of these are going to fail. As an investor, after the couple of years of being with these startups and you can see they're not going to attain the growth that we want them to, how do you let those startups go? How do you let the founder know that, hey, we're not going to, follow on for the next round? We just don't think y'all have what it takes. Is that a tough conversation to have?
It is. I mean, telling somebody that their baby's ugly is always really difficult, and especially when you feel like you're a surrogate parent to that baby as well. I mean, I think though we talk about failure. If you don't become $1 billion business, that's a failure, and that's actually not really the case. What we need to do is get enough of those that our fund can be great, but even companies that may not be successful could still return cash and more to the fund, which allows us to then take that money and kind of put it back in. So, there'll be a few that are just zeros, and that's kind of the way of the world. And there'll be a few that wash their face and return capital, and a few that might do a 3 to 5x, and you hope that you have enough that do the 25 to 100x that you can have a phenomenal fund.
The thing I would say about, just to anchor on these two questions around angels, right? Having been both an angel investor and an entrepreneur that accepts angel investments, there's, from an entrepreneur's standpoint, there's a huge difference between getting angel investors and getting a professional fund to invest in your company. If you kind of go back over the last 10 years, you've had the proliferance of party rounds where lots and lots of people put a small amount of money into a company. I've said almost over my whole career, I hate that concept. The idea that you have, we have 1,000 investors who each put $1,000 in, generally means that it's not important to any one of them, really. I would much rather have somebody who puts in $1 million and is going to be there for the duration and say, okay, this is really important that this company succeeds. And so from an investor, from an entrepreneur standpoint, I always sort of talk about having one big investor who really has skin in the game versus lots and lots of angel investors who, most of them are wealthy anyway. Sure, they want you to win, but it's not going to make or break their fund whether they give you $5,000 and you give them back eventually $10,000. Not that critical. The other thing I think in the question around, how do you know when to follow on? How do you talk to the entrepreneur? First of all, Andy and the Uncork team do a great job of this, but the reality is the entrepreneur usually can figure that out as well. As an entrepreneur, if Uncork leads your seed round, in order for you to be a really successful company, you need to convince other professional investors to invest in your business. That's like the core thing. If it's only Andy who believes in you, which would be amazing, that's great. But really, in order for you to build a very, very big business, you need to convince other investors who are also really smart and invest for a living to continue to fund the mission that you're on. And so usually for that is, Andy will support you 110%, of course. But then at some point, you need to convince another investor to also support you. If you can't, it's really, really difficult for Uncork to be your only investor over the course of your thing. So usually these things kind of like work out at some level where you either prove it or you don't. So
it's kind of funny to hear that neither of you were there at the beginning of Fountain or with Uncork. You weren't there yet when Uncork was already investing in Fountain, and so. Oh
no! I just wasn't there during when the very first time they met. So I led the investment.
Oh, okay, good to know. So, what was that like when y'all first met, and what was the relationship that kind of blossomed from there?
I'm a big believer that I want to do business with people that I like. And, with Sean, it was just somebody that we just clicked immediately. I think, very experienced, deeply pragmatic, just a lot of fun. We kind of share a love of whiskey as well.
Exactly. Very critical.
So, it turns out, we've got young families, our wives are now friends. And so, it was kind of the beginning of a beautiful friendship. But, at the beginning, it's just there's somebody else around the table who I think can help me. And in Sean's case, I can help him guide these two, very talented young founders to kind of whatever the next step in the journey is. And sometimes, you just click with people. And I think that this was a case of that.
Yeah, I would agree. It also, one of the things that's fun about this, not only is the point of you become friends with the people you work with, right? There are times in meetings where, we sit around as investors and somebody needs to deliver a hard message to the team, right? Here's a team that's been working so hard on something and they are slightly off. And by the way, show me a company that doesn't have that throughout their early part of their career, their early part of their life cycle. There are none. There are always things that need to be improved and changed. And it's always fun at the end of board meetings to sit back and say, okay, here are the three things. Who's going to go talk to the team that just worked tirelessly over the last 90 days? And typically Andy and I will look at each other and be like, I think it's your turn this time.
Gotta be Andy this time.
You go, or it's my turn.
Deliver bad news. It's Andy's turn this time.
That's right.
So I think we're kind of talking a lot of high level stuff, background on y'all's story, but I want to get specific because Fountain does some really great things on the very specific level of changing people's lives, getting them jobs. So do you have any, I know there's thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of stories of people finding jobs through Fountain, but if you have any that come to mind to just share with our audience and kind of give us that practical, what does Fountain actually do for people?
So Fountain is in the frontline worker space. So if you've read a lot of the headlines recently, you would hear about layoffs and people are hiring less people and they're cutting back and all those things. That is largely a knowledge worker phenomena. The frontline workforce, if you go into any restaurant or retail store or anywhere, there's always a sign on the door that says, we're hiring. Yeah. Even if they're laying people off in the marketing department. They are hiring people to serve food or make food or deliver packages or work in a nursing home or a warehouse.
And incentivizing it. They're putting the hourly wage on the door.
And saying, please come, and referring people and giving all kinds of bonuses. I think for us, that frontline workforce, again, is that underrepresented part of the economy. I think over the last 4 years, we've also learned how important that part of our economy is, right? Until like the grocery store runs out of paper towels. Yeah. All of a sudden now it's like, oh, well, we need people to stock those shelves.
Or if you can't get your Amazon package
if you can't get your Amazon package delivered, we got to figure out why there's a hiring problem in the front lines. So from a perspective of just a big picture, like that part of the economy is roaring, continues to roar. The reality is frontline workers continue to change jobs almost as actively as they did pre-pandemic, sometimes even more. But to kind of humanize it a little bit, I think, if you talk to the average knowledge worker over the last 4 or 5 years, almost all of our friends and family members have had some moment where we thought about changing our life. I think we all have friends who have moved to Montana, or they've bought a second home, or they've decided they're changing their career, they're reconnecting with their family, they're going to go live abroad somewhere, something like that.
It's a big life change.
Big life change over the last 4 years during this like sort of interesting period of time. And I think you're seeing something similar in the front line, which is a little different. But first of all, most frontline workers are not moving, to work remotely in Montana, and do Zoom calls. That's not what they're doing. But what they are saying is, I used to want 40 hours a week and I don't anymore. I only want to work here 32 or 28. I'll come work for you, but I only want to work here 28 hours a week. And when you ask them, why? They're like, yeah, I've got other things going on. I've got a side hustle. I'm working on this. I'm trying to start my own business. I'm driving for Uber. I'm delivering for DoorDash. I don't want to come to this warehouse 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and then do overtime. No thanks. So I think you're seeing that same change in the population. Obviously different. There's no Montana Zoom calls, but there is like a change of, I don't live to work. I work to live my life the way I want to live it. So you're seeing that from a human perspective.
How often are you able to have those personal conversations with people who have used your platform, have found a job through it, and are probably grateful for the role that Fountain played in getting them hired?
Yeah, we hear all the time. I think one thing that's also really interesting is just getting a job. Almost all of these workers are applying to like 8 or 9 jobs, and they have no idea where they are in the queue. Like, they don't know if they're getting hired. They generally apply for the job, and then they get a message that says, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Right? Which to them is like, well, then I guess I should keep applying for jobs. Doesn't seem like I got this one. Right? What we're seeing is when you provide feedback to them, like, you actually are not a good fit for this job, but we've got this other job over here. It's really interesting. Something like, in some of our customers, you'll see 10 to 20% of people apply for the wrong job. They want to work for the company. They just apply for a job that isn't a great fit for them. And our product is really smart at saying, okay, Josiah, that's not really the job for you, but here are 3 others.
How can it tell that? Just based on your resume or your past
Based on
experience?
the way you answer questions, say something like, to do that job, you actually have to be 21. You're only 19. But the customer still wants you. It's just you can't operate the forklift.
Yeah.
Right? Or you can't be a pharmacy technician because it turns out you need a license to dispense medicine. However, our store still needs great people. Would you be interested in trying out at this job? And then maybe if you go get that license, we'll move you into that other department.
Do you see a lot of young people using the platform of Fountain? Is that kind of where the majority of your users are, or is it across?
Yeah, it's across
ages?
It's across the age ranges.
Okay.
You'll see everybody from 15-year-olds who want to work as a cashier at a grocery store, all the way to 65-year-olds who are looking for a little extra money before the holiday season. Lots of our customers
read every year about like the 60-somethings who are looking for seasonal work, and they'll go and work in the Amazon warehouse or some other warehouse just to get a bit of cash to pay for what's coming up.
Exactly. Very, very common.
Yeah.
How does your platform, if at all, encourage young Americans to get work at a trade? I feel like there's a big conversation around we need more plumbers, welders. We don't need people being content creators like me and this guy right here.
We need to do a better job of that. Just truthfully, one of the things that I think one of the great things I think about the last 5 years, it has opened up HR leaders to things that they would never have thought before. So I'll come back to your trades question in a second, but just to kind of answer it, I spoke to a customer in 2020 who assured me up and down that they would never have anyone working at the company who wasn't 18 years of age or older. Then the pandemic happened, and they magically started hiring 16 and 17-year-olds, high school students, which they never thought they would do. But it turned out in order to stock the shelves with goods, they needed high school kids. Little funny thing about that, though, the retention of those high school kids is amazing.
Really?
They don't have as many opportunities. So they get a job, and if they get a job in September, they're pretty much there until May, almost guaranteed, which is not the same for most places. The thing I would tell you, most companies right now, if you talk to any company, any CEO of a large organization, they all have 2 or 3 roles that are the worst jobs to hire for.
Yeah.
Commercial truck driver, maintenance technicians, air conditioning repair people.
On paper, unsexy jobs.
All these trade jobs, electricians, plumbers are, whenever I talk to an HR leader, they're like, if you can find us more electricians, we will work with you. It is the biggest. If you're listening out there, either become an electrician or start a technology that creates more electricians, you will make lots and lots of money.
I think this is the byproduct of I think decades of kind of indoctrination to the idea that everybody needed to have a degree. Everybody had to go to college and everybody had to come away with a piece of paper. And that's honestly just not the case.
Yeah, totally agree.
Andy, earlier you were mentioning the difference between a good fund and a great fund. How do you ensure that Uncork is a great fund and not just a good fund?
That is the billion-dollar question, my friend. I think there are really kind of 3 parts to the job. There's picking, winning, and supporting. I think you've got to be good with the fact that you can't see absolutely everything. I mean, there are however many tens or maybe even hundreds of thousands of venture deals every year. You would tie yourself in knots trying to see them all. So what you've got to think about is how do I see enough of the good ones that allows me to then give myself a chance of winning those good ones and then supporting them to becoming great businesses. I mean, ultimately, though, it's all about the people. We talked at the very beginning about looking for that kind of spark, that magic when you first meet somebody. And a big part of what we do as we're kind of assessing these companies is really digging into the team, the motivations of the founders, their experience, what is it that makes them world-class at what they're doing. And, it might be that they have a PhD in some kind of AI that means that they can apply it to this problem. It could be like Keith and Jeremy, that they'd been frontline workers, but they could also code and they could build a product that kind of solved for their needs. My partner Trip has a great phrase that he loves to use about what we look for when assessing companies. It's team, and TAM. So it's all about the people. It really is all about the people. And they've got to be operating in a market that's big enough to support a company that can make hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. But, understanding that markets change, understanding that tastes change, understanding that that's not a constant, it comes back to the team, because if the team is good, they will figure out a way to make it work.
How important is it to find unsexy investments?
So In the last 5 years, I'd say that unsexy has actually become sexy. So if we'd been talking 5 or 10 years ago and, I said, I love investing in developer tooling, how do you help software creators build better software? People would be like, oh God, that's boring. Like you can't make money there. And of course you look at probably the biggest technology businesses on the B2B side in the last however many years, most of them are these kind of like unsexy infrastructural companies. I think there are really kind of two types of software company. There is the software company you can explain to your parents and the software company that you can't. And we love both of those. Yeah. And I think sexiness or unsexiness is in the eye of the beholder. Yeah. Ultimately what we're looking for are great people who can build really big businesses.
Is there any unsexy, unpopular sector right now in 2024 that you think in 5 years from now will be sexy again?
I think what we have to think about is with the advent of AI, and AI on one hand is, I think, completely overblown, and on the other hand is going to change the world. And I think both of those things can be true. Where are the areas? What are the companies? What are the business models that can be completely turned upside down through the application of artificial intelligence? And one that we keep hearing about is professional services. So professional services businesses were always deemed to not be venture scale because, your revenue would basically scale linearly with the number of people that you were hiring. All of a sudden, though, that's not the case. And now a bunch of these kind of professional services businesses can actually have the same kind of margin and growth profile as a technology business because so much of the work is being done by AI agents or kind of another AI technology. And so I think that is something that we're going to see a lot more of. And that was an area that, if you'd asked somebody 5 or 10 years ago, no VC would do anything that was kind of too heavy on the professional services side.
Sean, you as an entrepreneur, I'm curious, which is more difficult to work with and to communicate with, an angel investor or a larger investor with a firm with an HR department and just hundreds of employees or tens of employees?
Definitely the large firm. Neither of them are super easy. I think the other thing as an entrepreneur, you always, no investor, whether they're the most connected angel in the world or a really good fund, is ever going to know as much about your business as you do. And you need to be able to own your area really, really well. On the flip side, the thing that you never get as an entrepreneur is pattern recognition across companies, which is something that Andy and the Uncork team can provide, which is to say, hey, we're thinking about making this change. Now, I'm going to make that change or consider making that change one time, maybe once every couple of years. Andy will see that change across the portfolio 50 times. Right, 10 or 15 times a year. That's a place where going to them and saying, okay, this is the change I want to make. Who could I talk to? Or what should I not do? Mm-hmm. Or what should I definitely do? That's an area that would be really, really valuable. You don't get that with angels. Mm-hmm. You only get that when you invest with a fund. That pattern recognition concept.
Right. And the way we think about it, as we're kind of coalescing a seed round is thinking about what's the ideal syndicate for this company to help give them the best chance of success. And as Sean says, you need to have at least one and maybe two large funds that have resources, that have deeper pockets. If you need to come back ahead of the next round, do you have other people that can throw a bit of cash in? If you've got 1,000 angels each doing $1,000, then the chances are not many of them are going to come back, with more capital when you need it. That said, I'm a big believer that great angels can have outsized value versus the dollars they're putting in. I think you have to be deeply selective about how you use them, and you kind of get to figure out, okay, this angel's great for this angel's great for that, and you go to them with a specific request. Most angels have full-time jobs. They are execs or founders or something else. So, they don't have a lot of time to work on this stuff. They can't help you. They can't sit in a room for 3 hours typically and brainstorm something. What they can do, though, is kind of use their network and their experience to get you an answer really quickly to something.
Yeah. I would say the other thing with angels, right? We have a number of amazing angels at Fountain. Whether you're talking to your investors, your angels, and especially even customers, that ability to distill down what you're doing and your ask is like a must-have entrepreneurial trait. I think sometimes as an entrepreneur, you get so deep into what you're doing that you can't explain it to your parents and you can't explain it to an angel. And then all of a sudden they're like, I still don't know what you do. You need to be able to say, this is what I'm doing. This is the change I want to make. And here's my specific ask. I need to talk to 3 marketing leaders who are really good at marketing to consumers who have thought about X. All of a sudden, those angels come back and say, here are the 2 people you need to talk to. And I can intro you. Send me a little paragraph.
Sean, Andy, thank you so much for your time. Last question here. Fountain has grown unbelievably in the last couple of years. You have millions of users. You're in, I think it's over 75 countries, over 30 languages. What does it take to make that kind of final jump to make Fountain a household name where people are telling their friends and family all the time, oh yeah, just go download Fountain and you'll find a job in no time?
Yeah. Lots more hard work. Look, I wish there was some trite answer of oh, if we just crack this one thing.
There's no silver bullet.
There's no silver bullet. What we need to do is continue. We've been executing incredibly as a company, and I'm so proud of the Fountainers around the world for the work they do. We need to keep doing what we're doing. We need to continue to win big customers and continue to innovate on our products that enable our customers to hire and retain these frontline workers. If we do that, the next leap will happen. And I can tell you for sure, if we don't execute, we will get stuck. And I'm sure that the Fountainers around the world will listen and they will thumbs up that, because that's what they hear every day from me, which is this is an execution game now. We just need to be really smart about the way we're deploying our capital and execute every day to deliver for our customers and frontline workers. If we do that, the rest of the stuff works out.
And I think from the VC side, I have no doubt, right? This company will work. It is working. We will make money on this company. But coming back to your question earlier, what separates a good fund versus a great fund? If these guys have a good result, that's good. If these guys have a great result, that helps us become a great fund. If if we can build a business that's worth $2, $3, $5, $10 billion, that really does move the needle.
Yeah, I would say, the good news for us, going back to that passion conversation, delivering for the frontline workforce is work worth doing. Yeah. Almost regardless of the money. Now, we're in it for the money. We're not, this is not a nonprofit. We need to deliver for our shareholders and our stakeholders and our customers and frontline workers. And the way we do that is by putting revenue on the board and profit on the board. That's our mission. The thing we talk about internally is, the difference between that passion and that mercenary, right, is there's probably an off-ramp where everyone makes a little money and everyone decides that's great. It's not what we're up to. Yeah. We're in this to make a generational company. If we do that, it will be incredibly impactful for the Fountainers who work at Fountain around the world, be incredibly impactful for our customers, frontline workers, Uncork, investors, those hospitals and charities and companies that are relying on Andy and the Uncork team to return lots of LP capital. That's in our hands to do, and we have the right to do it. We just need to execute.
And I think going back probably all the way to 2016, one of the things that the team had put in a board deck was the kind of the goals and the missions of the business, and the number one thing was make a dent. And that can be applied to everything that Sean talks about. How do you make a dent in people's lives, and a good dent, by the way.
Good dent. Absolutely, good dent. But that's what we talk about: making a dent.
How do you make a dent in your customers' ability to operate well? How do you make a dent in the wealth you're going to create for all the people working at this business? And hopefully, how do you make a dent in kind of helping us return a really great fund?
Andy, Sean, we really appreciate y'all today. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much.